Welcome to episode 15 of the Lowdown Show. I'm Neil Graham. My guest this week is Austin Vince, who, despite looking like a cross between Austin Powers and Benny Hill, is the man who made Mondo Enduro, the OG motorcycle travel film. Vince is a character in the best sense of the word. He's a pacifist, a tree climber, former altar boy, and an enthusiastic lover of spaghetti westerns. He's also brilliantly smart and an engaging orator. This is a good one. But before we dive in, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease fresh in the stalls and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Shall we take the plunge?
It looks like a scar, doesn't it? Actually, I should turn it into a scar with a felt tip now. And we could talk about my brain surgery.
Brain surgery. I've just fogged my glasses for some reason. I don't know why that is. So let's start with this. Let's so people don't get confused. Can you explain the scar across your forehead?
I had a sponsorship arrangement with BMW, and the only way that I could sign the contracts to get me to ride the biggest, heaviest bikes in the world was to have my brain removed. And so,
how's that going?
It's great because I just don't ask any awkward questions anymore, and I do what they say. Yeah.
Well, you figured out how to deal with a German company, so congratulations. Now, on your website, you have a quote, and it says, "It is, quote, hard to pin down exactly what I do." So let's just say we met in a pub, and you know how pub conversations are. I'm really not that interested in who you are, and we're just kind of next to each other, and we're having a pint of Smithwick's. And how would you, in a thumbnail sketch, describe to me who you are?
Oh, easy. I've been a maths teacher most of my life. And but now I take people on off-road holidays in the mountains of northern Spain.
Now, your website paints a much cloudier picture of your past, where you've described yourself as, and again, this is your words, so don't blame me, a tree climber, a train spotter, a gymnast, a skateboarder, an altar boy. And I agree with you on the following one, which is the spaghetti western film enthusiast, of which I am one as well.
Yeah.
Of course, they're as good as they get, really, aren't they?
All of those things you said are true.
And then you also, and then you followed that up with another one, which I found quite interesting. You were in the military, and you said that you couldn't be an army officer, rather, for ethical reasons.
Yes, I was on an army scholarship scheme whereby I got a scholarship to become an army officer as a result of a series of interviews that I passed successfully when I was 16. But I had to do my high school and then university and all that stuff, and I had a gap year. Do you say that in Canada?
Yeah, essentially.
I had a year between school and university.
But remember, we're pretending I'm American. So.
Oh yes, and so I was actually 23 by the time I actually fully joined the army. Went to kind of report for my formal military training with all my high school and my university education behind me. And by then, I had basically discovered Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and I had decided that I could not countenance the idea of military violence.
Well, good for you.
But I was in an enormously indentured, prohibitive, constrictive financial contract with the military. So I had to. I couldn't just ring them up and say I don't want to come anymore. I owed them a lot of money, and of course I was young and had no job, so I had no effective means of paying them back. I wasn't independently wealthy. My dad couldn't bail me out. So ironically, I had to join the army to earn the money to eventually pay my way out of the army.
So you That's a real world catch-22, isn't it?
It was insane. And then so I had to keep my pacifism to myself. I knew it would only just get me into trouble or something. So I finished my military training, and then I discovered that when I was at a unit, sent to a unit with soldiers, I was an officer. I thought I was just going to put my head down, do my 5 years like a prison term or something like that. And I had 5 years to do before I was allowed to leave. And I realized when I was dealing with soldiers that I was just like lying to everyone. I was literally living a lie. So eventually I went to my lieutenant colonel, my boss, and said, look, I need to tell you something. I became a pacifist at university, and so I'm in absolutely the wrong occupation. And so then it was the incredible thing to me is that I filled in some forms. They sent it to a thing called the Army Retirements Board, which is an office in London that reviews the case of any officer who wants to leave the army before he's meant to be allowed to. So they looked at me, they looked at my case and my depositions that I made, and they sent back a message saying, no, we're not going to let this guy leave the army. We want him to carry on being an officer. That, of course, to me was like the ultimate statement of military intelligence. Somebody who says that they absolutely will not do the job.
So you are. I mean, my catch-22 quip was more apt than I think. So you're kind of like a real life Yossarian.
Well, I think I'm not sure if Yossarian was a pacifist. I think he just recognized the absurdity of war.
Right. True.
Of course, I would agree that war is absurd, and we can of course get into this if you want. But the simple idea, and I still am a pacifist, by the way. A lot of things about my values have changed massively since I was 23. But the more I've seen of life, and the more I've read, and the more I've read about previous wars, is I can't really think of a single war where the situation at the end of the war was better than the situation that the war was created to try and solve.
Not even the war on drugs.
Oh, I don't know anything about that, actually. That's more of your expertise, and given your recent.
Just well, the war on drugs, which was a big thing in America, which various presidents put forth, was to really all it did was incarcerate an astounding number of African Americans.
The war on terror, was that a success?
No, in fact, okay, you've given me an excuse to use one of my favorite lines. Gwyn Dyer, who's a political writer, very good political writer, said that having a war on terror was like having a war on carpentry. That it's absolutely, it absolutely makes no sense. Yeah, exactly. And so I thought that was the beautiful analogy for that.
Yeah.
Now, we should.
Are we going to be able to use any of that stuff?
It's all going in. But
your motorcycle people just want to know what sprocket size am I using at the moment? What's your favorite tread block pattern?
I'm fond of a 42 tooth rear sprocket on my Ducati because they're geared too tall. There's the motorcycle content. Now, because this is a motorcycle website and we've got off totally on the wrong foot, what I find interesting, Austin, about and I don't know your work particularly well. I did some research so I wouldn't appear inept. But Zach, who sort of runs the advrider.com website, told me that Mondo Enduro really was the beginning in many ways of the popularity of I don't know what you call it, adventure touring or adventure riding or around the world sort of stuff. And you also have a very particular style, because it seems like most people want to sort of, tout their sort of professionalism, and they've got all the gear and all the cases and all the equipment. And there's a very sort of slick sheen to it. And of course, it's been now that it's been taken over by the, ADV style motorcycles are the main kind of, they're the standard motorcycle of our age. Mm-hmm. That everything is slick, but your stuff is anything but slick. And I think if I had to describe you to someone in a pub, I would say sort of a halfway between sort of Austin Powers and Benny Hill rides a motorcycle. And so you've got this DIY ethos, and explain to me where that came from.
Well, it came from the fact that we had to do it ourselves. Simple as that. We could, especially with regards to my filmmaking, I would challenge strongly that the motorcycle films that I've made are ragged or rough at the edges. If I had a nickel for the amount of people that thought that we had a film crew with us when we did our big trips and made films about them, my objective was completely to make a film that looked as if it had been made by professionals, but actually had only been made by the people who were on the trip. So, and certainly my last big film, Mondo Sahara, I don't think that looks like a homemade film at all.
No, but it's not. And I know from my own filmmaking experience, I mean, you obviously you've put a lot of time into it and a lot of time into editing too. I can tell that. I mean, there's a lot of thought into it, but it's a bit of a ruse, I understand, but there is kind of there's a raggedness to the characters in it, which I think give people the impression that it's sort of thrown together, which it's not. Does that make sense?
I disagree.
Okay.
I don't think it looks thrown together at all.
No, it doesn't. Hang on a second.
It's normal.
It doesn't look thrown together, but it gives that there's because of the characters in the film, there's a looseness to the you as subjects and to you as a person. I mean, I think it sort of imbues it with your character, which is not an uptight kind of thing.
Yeah, my character's only in my films because I was there. If somebody else made them, it would be their character. But,
although if I keep provoking you like this, you may become uptight.
No, not at all. What we can say more clearly is that when you watch the first, because Mondo Enduro was the first ever adventure motorcycle TV show in the English-speaking world. That's to go back to your original comment from Zach. That's where its provenance and its pedigree and the respect that it has comes from. And then, of course, Ewan McGregor saw it on television. I mean, he was amongst the millions of people that saw it on TV back in the 90s. And then he bought the DVDs, and then those guys rang us up and said, do you want to will you come and help us organize our version of your film? And so inevitably, the Ewan McGregor film was so much more able to make an enormous splash because it had one of the most famous actors in the world in it. And it transcended being an adventure motorcycle film to being a piece of light entertainment. But I think if you look at Long Way Round up against Mondo Enduro and Terra Circa, if you step far enough away, they're the same thing. Some white British people ride motorcycles across Europe, Kazakhstan, and Siberia. That's exactly what happens in both of those films. But yet they're completely different. Yes. So maybe that's what. Maybe I could. That would be my riposte. And one of them. Let me put it like this: one of them seems like it really happened, and the other one seems like there was elements of it that were constructed or pretend.
Oh, don't say that.
But it's up for that would be up to the viewer to decide which one was which.
What led to Mondo Enduro? What was your thought process, and where were you as a in your mind as a human, as a motorcyclist, what were you trying to do, or what were you hoping to find in making that film?
It was very simple. My older brother, Gerald, he's 9 years older than me. He got me into, he had a motorcycle when I was a child. And as I went into my teens, he was in his mid to late 20s. And he had that kind of iron butt thing. And he was happy to spend his holidays riding his whatever motorcycle he had, enormous distances. And he'd go off to, he would drive to Istanbul and back, or he'd go over to America, borrow a motorbike and do a huge tour around the West Coast and everything, or Canada. And long distance motorcycle holidays, 100% on tarmac and in, let's say, first world locations, were completely normal to him. And then when I finished military academy, Sandhurst, I had 2 weeks of leave, or furlough, as I think you people say. And he arranged that we would ride on his bike up to Morocco and ride around northern Morocco and then get back to England in those 2 weeks. And that was my first proper cultural exchange, whereby we used the motorbike to go to a place that I was not used to at all, and was very different to Europe or North America or whatever. And it was exciting. And then the next summer, by the next summer holiday, we had resolved to do something else, and that something else was that by now it was 1989, 90, and the Berlin Wall came down, and my brother noticed that all of the visa restrictions, which were extremely heavy and claustrophobic for all of the Eastern European countries, had all been removed at a stroke. And so suddenly, in the summer of 1990, you could take your own vehicle into what used to be the Warsaw Pact countries. And as we know from all the Cold War movies, there used to be all checkpoints and barbed wire and tank obstacles and intrigue and espionage. And when I was a kid growing up, and I'm sure it'd be the same for anybody listening to the show, but in the 70s, you never heard of anybody who'd been to Romania or been to Bulgaria. They'd have to be a diplomat or to have been to those countries. And suddenly, in 1990, they were open. And so we had 3 weeks of holiday, and we and some other guys. There were 4 or 5 of us. We got on motorbikes on a ferry to Hamburg from England, and then from Hamburg, within an hour, you were in East Germany, and the whole border had been dismantled. So you just drove into what used to be East Germany. And the second you did that, you literally went back in time, and it was mind-blowing. It was easy. I mean, to this day, it was probably culturally the biggest cultural upheaval I've ever experienced was entering East Germany, and from there Czechoslovakia, and we created a route that went around got the atlas out, created a route that got to the Black Sea and back to Western Europe by going through every single communist Eastern European country. And it was quite big, we're doing 350 miles a day to get that done. It was all on street. And it was so exciting and depressing. It was I had no idea that there was this place in Europe that was so different. No artificial fibers, no fluorescent lights. Everybody wearing the same clothes. Hardly any cars, and if you saw cars, they're all the same model. No sensation of any kind of frivolousness. No waste either. Enormous levels of what you might call street side kindness. No question that people were suspicious of us for being foreigners. We were just greeted openly in a way that you never would be in France, which is only 25 miles from where I lived. And so at the end of that trip, our minds were blown, and we kind of thought, that project of using the motorcycle to have a cultural adventure, to see new things that we didn't even know existed. Because up until then, I'd always thought adventure was something to do with physical sport, mountain climbing, whitewater rafting, long distance cycling, something like that. That's why I always thought adventure was physical jeopardy based. And that trip in 1990 created in my mind this idea of what I now call social adventure or cultural adventure. So we were never in danger, but what we had to do was every day deal with people who had never seen anyone like us before. It's like being aliens, and it was exciting, really exciting. And the motorbike was the way to do it.
Now, some people would say that traveling by motorcycle is sort of a perilous way to see the world, especially back then when you were sort of pioneers in this, and yet you didn't think of it. You didn't feel yourself at risk in any way.
Well, only in the way that you obviously are. The
right.
minute you leave your house, you're more at risk than when you were sitting on your couch. I mean, but when you're in your 20s, you don't think, I better not ride a motorbike. I might get hurt. I'd already had I'd had a lot of crashes and stuff, but you know what it's like. There's when your elders and betters say, you shouldn't ride a motorbike, it's dangerous. That only spurs you on. You think, yeah, goddamn right, I'm going to ride this. I'm going to ride this thing. It's exciting. It's exciting. Some people don't want that excitement, or some people think that the excitement of accelerating away from some lights in a sports car, they think that's as exciting as being on a 125 motorbike. Which of course it's not. The motorbike will always be more exciting than the four-wheeled vehicle, unless the four-wheeled vehicle has got like a bomb in it or something like that.
And to jump in, what was it about the motorcycle specifically that you think or you feel lends itself to travel better than because you could have taken a car and driven in your
Yeah.
Vauxhall through Romania or any other country in
Oh,
that, you know.
Yeah, I don't think I have to answer that question. I mean, anybody listening to this knows
Of
why
course.
the motorcycle is superior to the car, as just simply for going to the shops or commuting. And as long as it's not pouring with rain the whole time, you know, we all know why it's more exciting. You know what they say? Why does a dog stick its head out the window?
To get to the other side.
In a car, when it's in a car, you know, it's just better. It's, you know, it's better, but you know, it's all the usual cliches: being in the picture rather than looking at the picture, being connected to the outside. Also, you know, there's a whole tranche of formal essay and thinking and philosophy about what they call vulnerable travel, and which is another thing that could, you know, takes us back to the long way around thing. When you read adventure travel literature and watch adventure travel films, when you encounter adventure travel stories that are devoid of jeopardy, they just fall flat on their face. It just doesn't work, you know. So you've got to, you know, if you as the protagonist in your adventure travel experience have got no jeopardy apart from, let's say, the fact that you're on a motorbike, which is a given because you'd have that jeopardy just driving around where you live at home. Which brings us back to the idea of social jeopardy. You know, motorcycling across country where you are not sure if the men in uniform are the good guys. That's exciting. That's much more exciting, actually, than any adrenaline you're going to get from trying to pull a wheelie.
eBay Motors is here for the ride. On this week's Fireside Chat, I'm going to talk about the time. We're talking pre-cell phone, Austin Vince's early travels. So I'm going to tell my pre-cell phone breakdown moment on my Norton, riding to New York City from Toronto, late at night, flying to Peru the next morning to go hiking the Inca Trail. And the bike, I bend the main shaft in the transmission. And I knew that's what happened because it was the third or fourth main shaft I'd bent. Horrible design. Anyway, the bike quits and I look up and there's a garage and the light's on in the garage. And the guy's a heavy equipment mechanic who's also a motorcyclist. He has a motorcycle lift. So I knock on the door. Within 5 minutes, my bike is on his lift. And I confirm that the main shaft is bent. I go to Peru. I come back to Peru. And then in the interim, I'd ordered a main shaft, had it shipped to his house. We put the bike together. I stayed at his house with his wife and his kids. Lovely people. Upstate New York, around Lake Placid. And it was a great experience. Now, would you even do that today? Could you even walk up to somebody's door and just ask for help? I mean, I suppose you could, but everyone just assumes you're going to call some sort of travel assistance thing that's going to come and get you. So, you know, we're more suspicious now than we are before. But traveling without a cell phone was really wonderful. And of course, you can't do it now. You can't go backwards in life. But sometimes I wish you could. Now, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With over 122 million parts, you can make sure your number one ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions naturally apply. Now back to my conversation with Austin Vince. You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. What was it like, though, to travel and make a film at the same time? Because it's sort of, you know, I mean, I've done smaller versions of what you've done, and it's really difficult. I always found it a real struggle too, because, you know, you sort of get your earplugs in and your helmet on and you want to ride and you round the corner and it's like, oh shit, there's something I need to film. You know, it's kind of an exhausting way to do it. At least I find so. I mean, what's your experience with that?
It was easy because on all the trips that we ever did, on Mondo Enduro and Terra Circa, Mondo Enduro was 14 months, Terra Circa was 7 months. When you got that long, it's not hard to be economical with what you shoot. I'd read some interviews with Clint Eastwood, actually, with his directing hat on, and one of his shticks is not overshooting compared to, like, you know, Francis Ford Coppola. I'm sure your readers will and listeners will know about the stories regarding overshooting on Apocalypse Now.
Of
But
course,
like
legendary. Yeah.
the scene at the beginning with Martin Sheen pacing around the hotel room in Saigon with the air fan reflecting the helicopter's rotors. That they shot something like 3 hours of that to take, and then took it down to whatever it was, 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
I could tell that was not helpful. And when you're an amateur and you haven't got any support or money, the last thing that you could therefore squander is time as well. So on those trips, Mondo Enduro and Terra Circa, it was pretty easy to not overshoot. And then when we did Mondo Sahara, that was my last film, which was actually made about like 9 years ago, that long ago. Then the part of the filming the filming project adventure, the filming adventure was to see, because we knew we were going to make a feature-length documentary, which was going to be like between 70 and 90 minutes. That was the obvious target length.
Mm-hmm.
So I approached that 28-day shoot with how little can I film to still create a high-functioning, proper feature-length documentary that is in no way DIY. So on all those instances, it never got in the way that much. Never.
What did you shoot Mondo Enduro on? Is it film or
it was one of the catalysts from the Mondo Enduro TV show, and also the reason that Mondo Enduro wasn't done by somebody else 5 years earlier. It's rather like, if I could digress for a second, I used to teach a music module at my school, and I did a lesson with the children that demonstrated that for technological reasons, the Elvis Presley-led rock and roll explosion of 1956 was inevitable because of technological advances converging at that moment in time. Elvis and Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis would have to have happened then with high what's the word I'm looking for, easily accessible record players, the recording industry, the record pressing industry, recording technology, mass production of instruments. Right. Music moved away from being a kind of upper middle class recital based, classical based thing. It was after the war, musical instruments started to get democratized, and in America especially, it was inevitable. I did a whole thing about how rock and roll had to have happened in America, not for cultural reasons, but for technological reasons. And the same was true with Mondo Enduro, that the video cameras available, or I'll put it another way, when we were kids, our dads had Super 8 cameras, cine cameras. And then video technology came in. It was big, bulky, difficult, expensive. Even in the 80s, British TV shows, when they had to go on location, would shoot on 16mm, and then in the studio they'd be back to video. But there was no portable video equipment, and Sony got busy on this at the forefront of it. And in something like 1992, they invented this format called Hi8, which was they created this thing called the charge coupled device, which was a chip. We'd call it now a chip that went into a camera lens, and it was able to turn light into semi-digital signals and encode it onto tape. And then in something like about 93, 94, they worked out a way of making 3 of these charge coupled devices, CCDs, one for each of the 3 main colors. I can't remember what they are, cyan, red, yellow, and all that stuff.
Cyan, magenta,
right. And put 3 of them in one camera. And that was the Sony VX1. And that was a format that they called Hi8. And if you we had a museum of what video pictures look like, that was the massive jump forward, Hi8. And they created a camera that it was called the Sony VX1. It was about the size of a big tennis shoe or a small boot. So absolutely, definitely a portable, domestic sized camera, self-contained with the batteries on it, no separate battery pack, delivering astonishing clarity of picture. But crucially, in Britain, there was a technical quality department in the BBC, and they had a rule that they wouldn't put anything on television at all that failed quality control visually. And all video cameras up until then were below the, well, we now call it pixel rate or something like that, but they were all below the quality control that the BBC demanded for broadcast. And when the high camera format, and then the VX1 especially, was developed, that meant that was the first domestically high street available camera that was legitimately and technically broadcastable, and that's what we bought. We hadn't been waiting for that moment, but we were the guy. People have been motorcycling around the world long before us, but they hadn't had access to that piece of equipment, and we did. So we shot something that could end up on television. So much as I'd love to be remembered as the visionary, I wasn't the first person who wanted to put a motorcycle travel show on television, but I was definitely the first person who was able to.
And because of this nexus of you and the technology, exactly.
Yeah, and the camera,
allowed it to happen.
Yeah. But the editing software, just as a follow-up, the editing software, interestingly, followed, well, I'd almost go as far as it was something like, 10 years behind the camera software. So it was something like, you'll probably know the better than me. I don't know when the first version of Final Cut Pro came out, but it was, I'd say, somewhere in the early noughties that a normal person could be expected to own editing software that worked effectively and properly on a laptop. So when we came back from Mondo Enduro, as amateurs, we had this fabulous footage, but we still had to go to professional editing suites that were sellers with, like, massive boxes of hard drives and computers, and you couldn't edit anything yourself electronically in the mid-90s. It had to be done at very expensive professional editing suites.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. I mean, and people don't realize that, you come back with this footage, or you shot something, and then, you have all these dreams for it, and then all of a sudden you run right up into some people in a giant building with,
you run into the TV
studios.
industry, which was,
that's right. Yeah.
In those days in Britain, was staggeringly complacent. I remember we had a phone call meeting before we left on Mondo Enduro with a TV associate producer type person who was gearing up for a documentary on British television about extraordinary journeys. And somebody had seen they'd done a call in a Sunday newspaper. Are you doing an amazing journey? Ring up this number and tell us about it. We might make a TV show about it. And we were like, oh my God, bloody hell! So we were like 3 weeks from leaving, and we rang up. We got through to the actual producer. And we said, yeah, I said, me and my friends are going to motorcycle around the world. We bought these little bikes, and we're going to also try and be the first people to ever ride motorbikes across the Soviet Union and get to Japan overland. We don't think anyone's done that before. And the woman said, she just said to me, why is that interesting? And so I said,
how does one follow that up?
I was stopped in my traps, and I said to her, I never forget, I said to her, well, yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah, it's not. It's just us going on holiday, which is true. It's true. We just wanted to go on a long holiday, and we loved riding our motorbikes, so that was the way to do it. But but of course, by the time a film star, 6 years later, a film star does the same thing, or 8 years later, and it's like, oh my God, this is so interesting. Why has this never been on television before?
Perhaps that woman had never been farther than Blackpool. It's hard to say.
Yeah. Anyway, we got it. That despite that reaction, I'm glad to say we had the presence of mind to shoot it anyway. To shoot on the trip. None of us had any experience making TV shows, but we were not stupid, and we had time, we had effort, and we had the most spectacular journey in the world as our source material. We were on location the whole time, if that doesn't sound too crass. So we shot what we saw. There was plenty of gold, tons of gold, and we also knew as we were going along, filming away, that we had that woman was wrong. We were going along thinking, you know what, we've never seen a TV show that's anything like this, with a load of goons kind of smashing and stumbling their way around the world with no backup, no support, no safety net, and we kind of just were able to keep going, have a crash, get recovered, break down, eventually mend it, keep going. And then, yeah, sure enough, 14 months later, we were riding back into London, into the same spot where we'd left from, and it had worked. And we had the shots. So it was very difficult to get it onto television in Britain. Very difficult. It was probably the hardest single battle I've ever had to fight in my life.
And why was that? Just
because there weren't nobody who worked in established television. Obviously, this is 10 years before the internet, so you couldn't just like publish it yourself. You know, if it wasn't on a television channel, it didn't exist. You know, it wouldn't exist. And
so were the gatekeepers at the broadcaster, and I assume it was the BBC. They didn't let you in.
The first thing, of course, to anybody who's probably less than 50 years old, they probably think it's incredible that there was a time that all the moving images that you ever watched were strictly controlled by a very small number of people.
Yes,
and not for censorship reasons, but the gatekeepers, or the commissioning editors, as they're known in British television.
Same here.
They decided what programs were going to be made, and so we went. We made a trailer, sent it off to everyone. Wrote up a thing, with some friends who did this trip, and it was the idea of turning our footage into a TV show was rejected by every single British broadcaster that existed. And back then, that was 9. There were 9 TV channels, including Discovery. They all rejected it, and then we, through a bit of not so much nefarious, but through a bit of nepotism, somebody we knew got a job at Discovery, and we were able to get like a second look, an appeal, if you will. And Discovery said, all right, we'll make this show, but only at cost. So we got nothing for it. And I sold my rights, or whatever you want to call it. We sold the whole show to Discovery for £150.
Wow.
They got it. They weren't, they said it, they effectively were saying to us, this is worthless.
And how did it do? How did it do?
Oh my God! It was watched by like 77 million people over 2 years. That's how in Europe. It went out on Discovery Europe. They subtitled it into about 14 languages, and it was shown literally from Moscow to Marrakesh, and from Norway to Turkey. And they showed it about like 100 times over 2 years. So it kind of achieved it amongst motorcyclists in Europe at that time, before the internet. The word started to get out, especially amongst dual sport people and what we'd call trail riders. People would say, I was, I watched TV last night, and suddenly a show came on about some people riding DR350s around the world, and I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? What's that doing on television? And so, but because we were not sponsored, and when this show was made, Suzuki wouldn't have anything to do with it. They firmly and forcefully said, we don't want to attach our names to your project. So we took the word Suzuki kind of like out of the film as our, up yours. So it meant that Suzuki, we had these bikes, we had all the pictures, we had the film. Suzuki weren't talking about it. There's no Suzuki press release about Mondo Enduro ever, and that was, it was amazing to me that but also I'm proud to say that we were so far ahead of the curve in terms of adventure motorcycling that, of course, in 1995, there was no such thing as adventure motorcycling. There was nothing with that name. There was just going on holiday on a motorbike. And so our kind of this, dare I say, our super long distance trip done relatively quickly because we were allowed to go back to work in an unsupported way, kind of not sanctioned by any manufacturers or anything like that, just as normal people would do it. That didn't, in many respects, that didn't capture the manufacturer's imagination, because it wasn't competition, and all manufacturers care about is racing and winning and cups and events and series and GP and stuff like that. Something that you can win and say, look, the fastest guy is riding our bike. But our story of these goons going around the world, being the first people to get across Russia, the first people to get to Magadan. Every Suzuki's heard of Magadan. They're not saying, oh, that's really cool. That's on our bikes. We should make a splash about this. They didn't. They didn't understand at all. And now, of course, adventure motorcycling is extremely well understood as a concept. So yeah, I'm proud that we were ahead of the curve. Yeah.
I used to work at a motorcycle magazine, and about 20 years ago, every month the phone would ring and you'd pick it up and it'd be someone you'd never spoken to before. And they would always the conversations would almost always start the same way, and it would be, "You're never going to guess what I'm doing." And I would always, and you know where this is going, don't you? And I would always say, "You're riding around the world," and they'd go, "Oh, how how did you guess?" So I mean, it became this thing where everyone, well, seemingly everyone, I think when I think of sort of around the world travelers, I have in my mind, I have the visual of people going up Everest, where it's
Oh,
this it looks like this giant stairway to heaven. Not to reference the song, but of people just going there, and there was this adjust your scarf for us there we go. And so, I mean, how do you perceive the sort of, and this is my word, and you may wish to change it, but sort of almost the professionalism that has surrounded adventure travel, and now that it's such an organized, and there's all these groups, and a lot of people have done it, and you can get guides, and there was a kind of a, as you said, the word didn't even exist when you did it. You just got on your motorbikes and away you went. How have you viewed the last 30 years in the progression of adventure?
oh, Neil, it makes me sad. Two things have happened that have essentially meant that the experience that we had back in 95, 96, riding around the world, that experience sort of can't exist anymore.
Why not? Why not?
Well, because for two reasons. One, when we set off, we had no idea what was going to happen. We had almost no idea what the places that we were going to go to looked like, especially in the Soviet Union, which represented the first, 15,000 miles of the journey. And we didn't, we wanted after the Soviet Union to ride from Alaska to the bottom of Chile, and then from Cape Town back to London. We wanted to do that, but we were realistic enough to realize we better get across the Soviet Union first before we make the next plans for the next bit. And there was no information about it apart from you might be able to buy. I had in my school library, there was a coffee table book called Soviet Deserts and Mountains, and it was in a series of books with titles like the Amazon Basin, the Nile Delta, the Victoria Island, or something like that. And then there are all these kind of like dramatic, physical, geographical, physical locations. But this book, Soviet Deserts and Mountains, I don't know how come I even saw it. I must have been literally browsing in the library, and I was in between lessons or something. And I thought Soviet Deserts and Mountains. I was like, that's ridiculous. That's an interesting thing. So the Soviet Union is just like green, isn't it, or like fields or something? Because of course I didn't understand what Kazakhstan looked like. I'd never seen a photograph of Kazakhstan. If you'd done like a multiple choice and given me 10 photographs of the world, and one of them was of Kazakhstan, I wouldn't have been able to pick it out. And I didn't know what Georgia looked like, or Turkmenistan, or all of the other or Lithuania, or the Baltic states, or anything. I didn't know what any of these countries within the Soviet Union looked like, let alone the people that lived there. So it was tremendously exciting. And I didn't really know much about Turkey either, for example. So once we left on Mondo Enduro, we went across France and Italy and then Greece. And once we were to Istanbul, I mean, that was hopelessly exotic. From Russia with Love, That Man in Istanbul. It was, I'd never met anyone who'd been to Istanbul. And Istanbul as the gateway to Asia was a cliche, but it was true. It was completely un-European. And then, so my point being that now with the internet, it would be impossible for you to be going anywhere on a trip on this planet and not be able to use Google Images or just simply to watch films made by people who've been there to find out pretty much exactly what it was like. And there's not many experiences, especially involving just crossing other countries, where you couldn't find somebody who'd done it before. Whereas for us in 95, we were very lucky. Well, of course, at the time we were cursing it. We wished we could find a book called The Route You're Going to Ride Around the World, and this is what's going to happen when you do it. We thought we were desperate for that book. Of course, we were idiots because we didn't realize that what made it worth doing.
Right.
And so now, if I had a son or a nephew or somebody, well, I mentor people all the time, but it's heartbreaking because I know that there's all of that mystery is gone, totally gone. And then the next thing that means it's gone forever is the smartphone. So when I think of if you read the Mondo Enduro book, which is our diaries, it's shocking that almost everything that we're dealing with, the vast majority of our effort is going into trying to survive day to day in ways that nowadays would just be dealt with by Google or Booking.com or couch surfing or Google Maps or something like that, or just go to a website. We were in Istanbul, we were in Ankara on the way out, the capital of Turkey. We were in Ankara for 5 days trying to find out if it was even possible to get a visa to enter Georgia. Now that would take not even 5 seconds today. And in that 5 days, we had this like mad time in Istanbul at night, in Ankara at night, but every day was just grind, driving from place to place, going to the Russian embassy, not getting in, queuing, just so much low level queuing, waiting, frustration, ignorance. Nobody knew anything. We were asking questions that no one had even asked. What do you mean an Englishman trying to get an overland visa for Georgia? There's no such thing. You have to fly in, things like that. I mean, it was just relentless amounts of administrative difficulty. So, but of course, in that we found all sorts of funny and interesting things, and we were. I go back to the idea of being vulnerable. We didn't know what was happening, and we couldn't. It was so hard to improve our situation with just effort. Whereas now, the smartphone will tell you what that piece of information that you desperately need to know, and the trip would be totally different. Which takes us back to the idea that it's not the riding along, it's not the going along and doing the miles. That's not, in my opinion, what around the world travel is all about. What it's all about is being vulnerable, having to go into a town and having to mime your way through a hatch the size of a CD with some old Russian woman and you're trying to book a call to England. You can't speak Russian at all. She certainly can't speak English, and you've only got mime then, haven't you? You've got a phrase book, and we didn't even have a dictionary. We've got a phrase book, and it's hopeless. And then you have to make friends with somebody in the waiting room. There's people queuing up behind you, getting pissed off, like, why are you taking so long to book this call? And so all of these, like, not adventures, but all these experiences we had that were enriching and represented massive cultural exchange, and therefore changed us into different people. All of that's gone. And so if I met somebody who'd motorcycle to Magadan nowadays, I would be glad they'd done it rather than carry on at home not doing it. I wouldn't say you shouldn't have gone, but I would know that we had a far crazier time than they did.
You're listening to The Lowdown Show, presented by advrider.com and supported by ebaymotors.com. With your early films, certainly, as you said, back to your sort of analogy with rock and roll in America, it's that you just kind of hit it at the right time, didn't you? There was the technology to make the films, but there wasn't the technology, the ubiquitous technology of constant communication, which I think, and my view, which has led to a certain sort of timidity. We have too much information, whereas you had that blissful naivete of not really knowing.
It was irritating.
It's irritating. It's irritating as hell. Yeah. But still, it's naivete, because had you known, it would have taken 5 days, to get nowhere. You might have, you may have thought, oh well, maybe this isn't such a smart idea. But you're there, and what are you going to do? And I mean, even some of the, I can hardly. You and I are about the same age. I can hardly remember what it was like to get on a motorcycle and go for a ride and not have a cell phone.
Yeah.
And if I do it now and forget my phone, I feel like I don't have my pants on.
So now, if I won the lottery, if I had millions, I'd set up a travel scholarship, and to get the scholarship, all you'd have to do is, obviously, you'd have to say, I want to do a worthwhile journey, not just like I'm going to the other side of the country I live in. And then all you'd have to do to get the scholarship is say, I promise I'm not going to take a cell phone. And I think that person is worthy of support.
But do you even think that's possible though? Because everything is,
well, that's the whole point. Of course, it used to be possible. So now, admittedly, even if you spent the entire journey going up to people in the street saying in another language, "Can I use your phone?" that would be like, you might have to sign a document on my scholarship scheme where you would ask to not even use somebody else's cell phone. That would be interesting. Well, I remember arriving in Russian towns and driving around them for like an hour to try and find the gas station, because it was never on the main highway that went through the middle of the town like it would be in the West. So then it would turn out it was like in some yard at the back of a housing cooperative somewhere. And of course, all the locals knew that. So eventually you'd have to stop someone in the street and start miming benzene, and then they'd point and you would understand it. And then eventually you had to wait till somebody said, oh, look, then we worked out, oh, you've got to get somebody with a motorbike or a car, stop them. And then they often would say, follow me. Well, we didn't know what they said in Russian, but it was obvious their body language was follow me. And so off you'd go, following this person to what turned out to be the gas station. And it was, of course, it was so annoying at the time, but now I realize it was just dynamite. It was pure dynamite.
It was the greatest gift you could have had. Correct.
Yeah, we didn't realize. I was too immature to realize what a fantastic experience I was having.
Do you, given the conversation that we've had and your concerns about how this perpetual connectivity has changed travel, does travel still do for you what it did back then?
Well, because I'm older and wiser, my eyes aren't as wide open as they used to be. That Mondo Enduro trip, I came back from that, such a completely different person 14 months later from the guy that left. And I was, back then when I was 29, when I left, I was in good physical shape, had a job, had a university degree. I was white, British, European. That my life was easy compared to most people in the world. But I came back from that trip just like with a superpower. And the superpower was, of course, that I couldn't imagine a problem that I couldn't solve, really. And if I couldn't solve it, I'd find a way of finding the person who could solve it. So that year on the road, and once again, which brings us back to the smartphone thing, if you did the same route that we did nowadays with a smartphone and with the internet existing, you'd have just nothing like the experiences that we had. How hard we had to fight to find somebody who could make a sprocket for us, because they were from a sheet of steel on a lathe, in a machinist workshop. That was it for us to get a sprocket onto our motorbikes. That's what we had to do in Siberia, have it made from scratch. That'd be unheard of nowadays. You just get DHL to send it to you from wherever you could just ring up your local spares person, and they DHL it to you. And you just sit there and turn up, and that'd be it. It's so simple. So I think it's just I don't want to sort of go on too much about the past, because the world, every generation has a different thing. I grew up with television. My mother and father didn't. Yes. So the world changes all the time, but we were lucky. It was the perfect moment where the internal combustion engine was good enough to make a bike that was feasible to ride around the world for normal people, without being independently wealthy, like Robert Fulton Jr. or whatever. We were able to able to access with material that you bought in the high street. We were able to access the entire world, and it blew our mind. And we just, we came back as problem solvers. And my pacifism, ironically, crossing the Soviet Union, our sworn enemies, my pacifism was hardened and became entrenched, because I knew that only 3 years earlier, or 4 years earlier, I'd been in the army. And when I was in the army in Britain, in the British Army of the Rhine, where I was posted, our job was to stop a Soviet invasion of the Free West. And spending 6 months riding across the Soviet Union and meeting Russians and sleeping in their barns and being invited into their homes and being broken down by the side of the road in the pouring rain with mud everywhere, and a bloke comes up to you, some Russian guy, and you can't understand him obviously, and you mime your way to the fact that you need some bearings, and he says I could do that, and then you go back to his house, then there's a party and you'll get drunk, and all I could think was what these are the guys that I'm meant to be scared of. These are the guys I want to live next to. These are the people that I want running my country. You know, I think, like, bring on the Soviet invasion. Yeah, it was, and I, of course, the only way all of us in the West bought into the story of this terrifying Soviet regime that lived and breathed our destruction, whose entire mission statement was to make sure that our way of life was extinguished. I realized that it was not only simply not true, it was laughably untrue. But I could never have known that reading a pamphlet. I had to go and live amongst Russians and realize that they were the single most hospitable and decent people I'd ever met in my life. I don't know about oligarchs or Russian gangsters. They're probably assholes. But the Russian in the street was a fabulous, fabulous person, and no different to the best of the Americans that I've ever met, the best of the Canadians, the best of the Spanish, the best of the Mexicans, and so on. I never went to a country where your average people were pretty unpleasant. Never.
It's kind of a truism. It's one of the great things about travel, and I mean, one of the things that I find alarming, specifically about America, is that the number of Americans that held a passport was laughably small. The percentage.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It's really
weird
small.
The way Americans think. I've talked to Americans I was in Seville recently on holiday for a weekend break, and you meet Americans there and you get chatting, and they think Seville is like going to Spain is like a dangerously exotic foreign country. That's why we made the Mondo Sahara film, because I wanted to take American passport holders to a country whose name started with the Islamic Republic of. And I wanted to make a film about what happens when Americans go to that country, which everyone says they mustn't go to. My own government said you mustn't go to Mauritania, the Islamic Republic of Mauritania. It's on the Foreign Commonwealth Office watch list. It's shaded red in their map of the world. No-go zone. And Mondo Enduro gave me that wisdom, not recklessness. It gave me wisdom to not believe the grown-ups, to not believe the media that's owned by like 4 people.
We've all been hoodwinked, haven't we? Because people really are. I mean, it's kind of sounds like a cliche, but I mean, I've been astonished. I remember breaking down in somewhere in America, Pennsylvania. It was midnight, and we'd been drinking, and a woman stops with like 3 children in the car, and hops out of the car and comes back to a bunch of us, And I kept thinking, woman, you shouldn't stop. There's a bunch of guys here at the side of the road. Like, why are you doing this? And yet she was just like, my husband's at home. We live 10 miles down the road, and sure enough, she went, and he came back, and it's midnight on a Sunday night.
Yeah,
just working class people. I mean, it's astonishing what we are capable of, and what happens all the time, everywhere, and yet people are terrified. I mean, one of the not to get too far off topic, but there was a survey done in America saying, why do you asking people why they're fond of the SUV, and one of the most prominent answers was you could see someone standing behind it because it's so tall that you could see someone's legs or feet behind the vehicle if you came out of a shopping mall. I mean, the idea that someone could surprise you and sodomize you in the parking lot of a Walmart.
In your dreams, Neil.
Exactly. I've been waiting for years for this to happen.
Exactly. Now the SUV's scuppered it. There's 2 kinds of people in this world. If I had a nickel for every person that's told me about how dangerous the country is, that it turns out they have never been to, and I have. Yeah. And not only have I been to that country, but I've motorcycled from one side of that country to the other. So I didn't just like fly into the airport and book into a 4-star hotel for a conference or something. So you get to, when you do this long distance transcontinental travel, you, apart from in Central America, obviously, because of the tiny countries, you get a really good feel for what a country is like when you ride from one side of it to the other. And it's really healthy. Obviously, you get even more of a feel if you were cycling or walking, but that takes too long. So the motorcycle is the perfect thing. The plane is too fast, foot is too slow, but the motorcycle is just right.
Even a DR350.
What do you mean? Even it's like a perfect tool for the job. Yeah.
Oh, come on! If you can't take a cheap shot at Suzuki, where's the fun? I'm going to pull up some images that I pinched off your website, and perhaps you could talk about that, and then we'll wrap this up by telling me what you're doing and our listeners what you're doing now.
Yeah.
And if everyone found you really charming, they can actually go and spend time with you.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
It is astonishing. or they can head off they can go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Let's,
wow.
Aside from the sunglasses, which is a questionable choice, tell me what's going on here.
Oh, so my wife Lois, she's done some very long motorcycle trips around the world, written very good books about them, and is well respected in her own right. We hooked up with Ural, who Medina at Ural, who were in Seattle, and they arranged for us to pick up that sidecar and rig in Richmond, Virginia, and they let us just take our own sweet time and ride it 6,000 miles back to Seattle, just for fun. We made a couple of films for them as a thank you for that, and Lois did some articles about it, and that's us in somewhere in Colorado. That's obviously an old railway tunnel. We were with Ned Cease. Some of your riders will know who he is, and he was hosting us, and he took us up there, and he took that picture actually.
All right, let's go here. You're looking positively heroic here.
That picture was taken outside a big motorcycle publishing company in Britain, and the photographer asked me to do that. So that's not my normal pose, but it does feature my US Army Alice packs. Alice pack. I got 2 Alice packs, which I bought. Infantry, whatever it is, I can't remember what the Alice acronym stands for. And I had 2 of them slung together, stitched together. And that was my Suzuki DR350. That was stolen though. They all were. I had 9 of them, and they were all stolen one after another over the years.
Really? Oh, in the UK or elsewhere?
All stolen in London.
Jesus.
Yeah.
See, there's a place I'm afraid to go now.
It's
give me Guatemala.
I mean, just search on YouTube. Man attacks member of public with a hammer in London. You'll be overwhelmed with stuff, with content. So, not to suggest that London's more dangerous than anywhere else, but the fantasy that living in a rich Western country means that you're safe, and if you go to a poorer, more unknown country like Afghanistan, let's say, you'd be unsafe, is ridiculous.
But that perception exists, though, doesn't it? Still.
Yeah, and it's alive. It's not only does it exist; it's not an obscure thing. That's the mainstream thing.
Yes.
Why would you want to go to that foreign country? Oh, it's in Ethiopia. That was on the way back, so to speak. So we're probably about like 90% of our way around the world, and in Ethiopia, whenever you stopped, you would find that there were people by the side of the road, many of whom seemed not to be doing anything, and the standard uniform would be wearing a blanket as a kind of cape, poncho type thing, and carrying a stick. So the boy at the back, there's like thousands of children in Ethiopia walking around like that, and that saucepan had last night's food in it, and we'd made enough for 2 days. So we carried it on the back of the bike with a bungee holding the lid down onto the saucepan, and then that was the second evening, and we got some twigs, got a fire going, and heated it back up. And that was our supper. And so the kids came and hung out with us, and of course they didn't speak English, we didn't speak Ethiopian. They had some of the food. It was cool. We were mobbed. By the end, there was like 25 children there, and it was a delight. Ethiopia was just such a surprise. So interesting, so beautiful, so unexpected compared to everything I thought I knew about it. A real jewel in the African part of the journey.
I think it's so true that we, and I think we do it without realizing we're doing it, which is I remember traveling to Zimbabwe, and I just thought it was, flat, dusty, dirty desert. And then, we're up in parts of it are like Ireland, as green as Ireland. And I had it wasn't so much that I wasn't, how am I trying to say here? It wasn't so much that I was surprised. I didn't realize I had a preconception.
Right.
ahead of time.
I had a
think
preconception from the Live Aid thing. What did you call it in America? Was it called Live Aid in America?
Yeah, same thing.
Feed the World.
Yeah,
No,
something like
what
that.
was it called?
Well, Live Aid, wasn't it?
Yeah, was it called Live Aid in America? Oh, sorry, I thought it was just the British. Yeah, so when we had Live Aid, that was all about the famine in Ethiopia, which I didn't realize was to do with civil war.
Yeah,
I thought it was just because it hadn't rained or something like that, or maybe it was that it hadn't rained and there was a civil war. But I didn't realize that there was this humanitarian disaster that was essentially man-made in Ethiopia, and our TV screens were filled with all these starving children. And then when we got there, it was like, wait a minute, this country could be quite high functioning if people would stop arguing about who's in charge, or it was the whole. I mean, it was, and also once again, it was great to come in from the transition when you go north to south on the earth. Anybody who's driven from Alaska to Chile will tell you this, but you get the same thing in Africa, but it's different. When you come in the bottom of Ethiopia, you're coming out of the Samburu Desert in northern Kenya, proper full-on desert. And then it becomes incredibly lush. But then by the time you come out of the north of Ethiopia into Eritrea, you're back to desert again, and you're in what essentially southern Egypt is like. And the country is just this small band of temperate climate. I mean, it's probably about 1,000 miles north to south, at least, Ethiopia. But so interesting. And of course, ethnically, utterly different to even their neighbors, the Somalians and the Eritreans. So visually, every face you looked at was a treat. Really cool.
Yeah. One more image here.
That's also in Ethiopia. And there you can see how it's as flat as Kansas there, isn't it? And we'd gone off into that field behind us. You can see the line of telegraph poles on the road. So that's the axis of the road there. So we're just up to near the road. But the night before, we'd gone off into the big stubbly field and just laid on the ground, sleep. We didn't have our tents. We had our tarps then. And we thought it might rain, and we just were too tired and too lazy to put up the tarps and sling them between the bikes. Then it started raining in the night heavily. So we got soaked, and we set up the tarps in between the motorbikes because, as you can see, there's no trees there. And then we got dry and slept. And then in the morning, the clay soil was completely just reduced to like the most perfect gelatinous mud. And we had tires on the bikes, and we literally couldn't get the bikes from where we were, like 200 meters from the road. We couldn't ride. We burnt out one of the clutches in that morning alone, and we had to have all four of us pushing one motorbike to try and get it to the road. It took ages. That picture was the end of like 4 hours of shoving. You could see how much mud's on that front wheel. Like all covered in mud. But I love the fact now that everyone's wearing leather trousers and rugby shirts. That was our official adventure clothing. And can you see nobody's wearing motocross boots?
Now, if I was the type who enjoyed this conversation with you and would like to spend more time with you, how could I do that? What are you doing these days?
Well, I am, because I run motorcycle holidays in Spain, off-road trail riding holidays or dual sport holidays. If any of your listeners wanted to do a week of fantastic world-class riding in northern Spain, I am I've spent the last 25 years researching off-road routes, off-highway routes in northern Spain, inspired by kind of like my own love of trail riding, and in part by Bryce Stevens and his BDR, Backcountry Discovery Route project, which I thought was a brilliant idea to start cataloging the long distance routes that existed in wilderness areas instead of just letting them exist or keeping them secret, sort of thing. So I take people on week-long holidays. So if you wanted to do that, I can get you a motorbike. If you're North American, though, you probably don't need to come to Spain to do some great dual sporting or trail riding. However, the Spanish thing does give you the fact that we turn around the corner on one of our trails, and there's an abandoned monastery that was built in the year 1560, and it's all intact but abandoned. And you go in and there's artifacts all over the place. So you get a lot of an amazing history, and of course, people love. I have about 5% of my customers in North America, and they fly into Barcelona. They come and join me, and then they'll spend another week in Barcelona, Madrid, or go down to Granada or Seville or Cadiz or Malaga. I mean, Spain is definitely one of the most stupendous countries in the world for historical architecture, let's say, superimposed on spectacular scenery. There's a reason that Spain's used in all these films. I was on a trail, one trail only in May, and in the morning I was in the place where the cemetery was, where they filmed the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's known as Sad Hill Cemetery, and that's near Burgos in northern Spain. And it's been restored, and all the graves are there, and tourists come and take pictures of it, and they pretend to be Clint Eastwood or whatever. And then by lunchtime on the same day, I was driving through the actual forest that was used in Dr. Zhivago, that had been used to represent Siberia, where, for anybody who knows their way around Dr. Zhivago intricately, the bit where Omar Sharif encounters Strelnikov's battle train, which is painted black with a giant red star on the end of it, and he kind of gets arrested in the woods, and they take him into the back of the train, and there's Strelnikov, Tom Courtenay's character, and Omar Sharif says, "Wait a minute, Strelnikov, I recognize you. You're the guy that used to go out with Julie Christie, who shot Rod Steiger at the start of the film." And he's like, "Yeah, well, that's all gone now." But so those two places are like 17 miles apart. So Spain is extraordinary in its physical diversity. It's like America in that respect, except it's squashed into something the size of an American state. That you can find in America, that you can't find something that looks pretty much like it in Spain. I'll tell you that now.
And they have paella.
Well, yeah, well, you can probably get paella in Toronto or whatever.
You can, but it's not the same. It's like this Peruvian cevicheria joints, where you get piles and piles of ceviche, where over here you get a little bit and it's $32. And this on a very serious note, your favorite spaghetti western and why?
Well, actually my favorite film is For a Few Dollars More.
Film period. Like you're saying, your favorite film of any genre.
Yeah. Oh, period. Like in the American sense, full stop. Yes.
Yes. Full stop.
I thought you meant film period, and I thought, well, it wasn't filmed over a period. It was For a Few Dollars More is my favorite film.
Like an epoch.
Firstly, of course, it's just a solid an action film. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is arguably too long. A Fistful of Dollars is maybe too short. It hints of the greatness to come. I think I think Once Upon a Time in the West is too flabby. It's beautiful and everything. It's got these amazing elements within it, but it's sort of not that exciting. Once Upon a Time in the West, it's ponderous. Then you've got the other something like Fistful of Dynamite or Once Upon a Time in the Revolution. Julia Testa, Daku Saka. It's all the same film. That is a bit too serious for me. But also, For a Few Dollars More was really the first film that I came into contact with as a sort of 10-year-old, where watching it kind of traumatized me. I was so profoundly affected by something that I knew, of course, was pretend and fictional. The music, the style, the action, even the title sequence at the beginning. I was really hooked. And then I didn't understand that I was watching an Italian Western. I just thought it was a Western. I knew it was different, you see, to The Magnificent Seven, which I loved. And Gunfight at the OK Corral, those kind of classics were accessible to us when I was a child in the 70s. But you had to dig a bit deeper you were lucky if suddenly For a Few Dollars More kind of landed in front of me without me searching for it. And when it was exposed to me, I was like, this is the thing I want. This is the place I want to be in. And then luckily, this would be about 1977, maybe 76, on BBC Two, the kind of oddball, the more alternative of the two BBC channels. So this is a time in 1976 there were only three TV stations in the UK: BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, independent television. And on BBC Two, they did a 5-week season of what they called spaghetti westerns. And I think my elder brother, Gerald, or somebody tipped me off and said, you need to see these. And oddly, they were on early enough that I was allowed to watch them and still go to school the next day. So normally in Britain, a lot of films would be off on what we called After the Watershed. They wouldn't be on until 9:30, something like that. And I'd be in bed. I'd have to be in bed at like 9. So these films were sort of like 7:30 to 9 o'clock. And I was allowed, my mum allowed me to watch them. And I watched all 5 in a row. And then, they were for a few dollars more, Sabata, The 5-Man Army, My Name is Trinity, and I can't remember the 5th one. It might have been A Professional Gun. And so whoever curated that list did bloody well. It was like excellent. So once I watched those 5 films back to back, out of time, obviously, before there was VHS. If you didn't see a film at the cinema or on TV, you didn't see it at all. So to get presented with those 5 films and their astonishing soundtracks and everything, the look and everything. And then somebody said, you know, these films are all made by Italians. I was like, what? What are you talking about? How can they be? They're Westerns. and that was literally life-changing. And I haven't looked back. I've never shrugged it off at all. I've always been obsessed.
In closing, a word from our sponsor. eBay Motors is here for the ride. With some elbow grease, fresh installs, and a whole lot of love, you transformed 100,000 miles and a body full of rust into a drive that's all your own. Brake kits, LED headlights, whatever you need, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Naturally, exclusions apply. Thank you for listening to The Lowdown Show.